Hey, what's good, everybody? So we're going to touch down. I know it's midday, but we're going to get into. We're going to tap back into this basis of spiritual psychology, and we've been talking a lot about the matrix. And what I want to do is talk and pinpoint about the matrix entrapment, and come from that angle. So give a little bit of time for you to reach out and touch somebody. I apologize a little earlier. It was casting from a different mode, and I didn't know what was going on, but I believe that we're good now. Let me know if you can hear me, and if so, we're good. Okay. So we're gonna do. So anyway, so just to recap a little bit, there is a very popular scripture that is quote is cited as "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Uh, there's another verse that talks about "Don't be enamored by this world." There is in a lot of wisdom texts various references to the world. As y'all know at this point, we refer to the world. It also translate as matrix. World also translate as the term cosmos, which is referred to as cosmetics, so decorations. And so we have established that the matrix is a perceptive infrastructure that influences people to be convinced of things that actually are not, because it uses decorations to help alter perception. And often we can't pinpoint and say the matrix is here or there, because it's more, as I said last live, it's more atmospheric. It's the ideation type of landscape. So it's contained with different things that are intangible, but they're part of an infrastructure, and they're designed to convey certain impressions at the society or people that it is influencing. And if you're not aware of these influences, it will begin to shape your orientation, shape how you see things, shape how you make decisions, shape how you value things, etc., because of the ongoing um, ingredients that allows this matrix to exist. So picture like a matrix as a mold, and it's had these impressions that are shaping us and convince us to things that are really not. So when we talk about entrapment, the entrapment piece is come from understanding there is another verse that says the world blinds the minds of people. Okay. Then there's another popular verse that we hear often. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. There's a lot said in that short expression. But if you begin to infer into that, it gives you understanding that if we're talking about freedom and we're talking about truth, there's an undertone that there is something that's going on with reality. How do we know that? Because truth means knowledge of reality. And so anytime that knowledge of reality is distorted or not easily accessible, it sets the grounds for entrapment. And because there's entrapment, that means there has to be an aspect where something has to get what? Free from the thing that it is quote unquote imprisoned or shaped, or they find themselves constantly compromising themselves of, based off of the impressions coming at it or the setup to allow them to make decisions contrary from what is benefiting. Okay? And so when I say prison, so think about another verse. It says, what shall it gain a man if he gain the whole world, but yet lose their soul? This is all these expressions, and I'm not trying to be preachy, but I'm referring to these scriptures because there's a lot of wisdom in it, and it speaks to the truth in our true everyday dealings and what's going on. And there's a point in life, if you're not old enough yet, but you get to a point in life, especially when you start getting in your mid 40s and you get in your 50s, you have something where I like to identify when I sit down with individuals. It's pattern exhaustion. What I mean is that you have lived long enough that you have recognized cycles, you've been part of cycles, you have created cycles, you try to escape cycles, or then you also find yourself in cycles that you can't get out of, but you know this cycle exists. And if you're experiencing that, that is pointing to a matrix effect. Okay? And so that matrix effect is what we're going to identify as entrapment. Because some reason I see the alternative, but somehow I can't get out to get to that alternative. There's something that is hindering me to get to this alternative that I desire to be. When you're in that type of conflict with inside yourself, that is entrapment. And so the world with inside its nature has a way to engineer by design inside of it, by using word cycles, by using environments, by using agriprop, by using all these memes, as I talked about before, entertainment, all these different things, to constantly to sell a counter or alternate idea versus the reality of a thing. Okay? And so when that is going on, that is re-altering someone's how they see things. Okay? And so that's what we're talking about, is the entrapment. And so when it says you shall know the truth and truth shall set you free, it's showing you that the key ingredients in order to rise above or to shift into a different direction of being entrapped is that you have to have access to truth. Truth is always present. The battle is against the distortions or the veiling of the truth, because a lot of that comes across in what? The system. See, there's a lot of, think about it, there's a lot of knowledge that goes across, but how much insight comes across, how much wisdom comes across, how much understanding comes across. But you think about what I just said right there, because a lot of times we'll clump it all together. But when you start talking from a metaphysical point of view, from a spiritual point of view, you got to understand the nature of the warfare, the opposition of living inside your truth, living with inside loving yourself, versus things constantly persuading you or things trying to mold you to operate outside of that. Okay? And so again, why does it use primary knowledge? The battles around knowledge, the battles around what we know. So if we are primarily presented what I call fragmented knowledge versus holistic knowledge, which means that there's four pieces inside knowledge, and one part of that piece is the result or the outcome. Another piece is the awareness. Another piece is the practical. Another piece is the technical. Well, all of these need to coincide with each other to point to the measurable. If an outcome that I have, it should be traced back to a practice, a skill, or an awareness. If I'm presenting information and I'm just aware of it, but I never get to the outcome based upon what I thought I was aware of, that's a sign that you receive fragmented knowledge, and that's a sign that there's a matrix influence at play. Give you an example. A lot of us are mature. We're in a very seasoned part of our lives. And a lot of people, especially Generation X, a lot of it's been sold into the concept of, of retirement or like our Social Security. A lot of us know that guiding post has always been moving forward. A lot of us know, even if we have worked at certain jobs, we know realistically we will not be able to retire off of the jobs. A lot of us, some of us has went through downsizing their jobs and faced the harsh reality that the company had no obligation, even if the company dismantles, that is obligated to give you the savings that you had in the 401ks. Okay? And so the point I'm making is that we were sold one thing, but when we trace it to the result or the measurable, it doesn't match. That's a matrix effect. That's an example of being sold one thing, right? Or presented one thing as is that really is not. So the reality is, an example I gave is that corporations and stuff like that doesn't really have an obligation to make sure you have a retirement account. That power and responsibility is solely upon you. Now, the other part that we're sold is that a lot of us thinks if you're got your money in some type of account and it's making 10% a year, that you're moving forward. The truth is you're not. You're not even keeping pace with the real inflation. Okay? And so now it's different if you're making 10% on your money or your assets a month. That's totally different. That means you're making 120% a year. Now you're talking about moving forward. But is that really clear and communicated really clear come across to us? No, it's not. Why? Because the matrix effects. Because somebody is presenting fragmented knowledge versus holistic knowledge. The awareness you have doesn't match the result of what you thought, what you was told and informed with. And a lot of people want to put their head in the sand and start talking into that type of area of focus. But the reality is here. You can't ignore it when you're, when you're in your 50s. You can't ignore it. You got to recognize it because it's here. Right? Some of us has been encouraged to take certain medicines. They make you aware of something, but it doesn't pass to the result. They don't tell you about all the different other things associated with it. Or they don't tell you the alternative, a natural alternative that you can take to move past or taking something that's synthetic. Or they don't bring you to a certain regimen you need to adopt as a lifestyle to help correct and change a particular situation. Why is that? As I mentioned in the earlier lives before, because inside the matrix, one way to identify the matrix is the person prescribing a solution, are they more focused on the profit or the person or the people? Right? Is there more demand on me to drive a profit versus me informing you with the truth on how to help your well-being? You have to answer that for yourself. If you're experiencing that, that is the matrix influence. And so this is where it's talk about you should know the truth and the truth should set you free, is that in different arenas in life, the thing with your spiritual path and our spiritual path, it should help bring awareness to these truths. In other words, knowledge of reality. So there's knowledge sources to help us to identify the reality of what's real, of what's going on, what is substantial of what's really going on. And so when we talk about entrapment, we're talking about that we have been pulled out of the reality of the thing. And then we're fashioned, I mentioned before, we fashion our lives around these counter realities, around these fragmented knowledge. And we get to a space in life, like I said, and you go through, I call it pattern exhaustion. The things you thought, the things you trust in, the things you believe is now being dismantled. You find yourself like, this stuff is not so. I was told this, but then the outcomes, the measurable piece shows otherwise. Well, how is that? What happened? So what I'm pointing at right now, that's the effect, that's the influence of the matrix. So it's woven in many different ways. And then what happens is when we don't ask the right questions, in other words, if we don't have the right seek, I want to get at, if we don't seek truth, then what we do is we grow our bondage. We grow our imprisonment. Imprisonment of what? Our physical bodies? No. But imprisonment of you and I's perception. Right? Imprison the perception, imprison the decision making. Right? Imprison decision making, you're now able to control someone's reality. And when people are now making decisions that's outside of their own interest, now you have people that are disenfranchised. And so, yes, we could use a stronger word. So then exploitation is highly evident. And so we see these different blocks of generation. So I'm talking about Generation X, and we're going to see some very deep exploitations. Right now, you see a lot of people already recognizing things. This is why you see people trying to shift and trying to downsize. It's a natural phase of life. Okay, they're trying to downsize where they stay, but people are changing their whole understanding about what we've been sold. And it's good, and it really needs to happen, because this is also a time of, of the overall grand scheme of the astrological forces that's going on. The position of the planets has us at this space to question reality, to dismantle some of these beliefs we've been sold that's not giving us the outcomes that we want. And this is why I'm doing these small little series about understanding the entrapment of the matrix, because it's part of dark psychology. In other words, dark psychology is things that's causing the soul of us, the mind of us, to be in a darkened or unaware state. The unaware state is what the matrix thrives off of. It profits off of and exploits. So in order to change that, we have to shift and get ourselves into a counter matrix. And we call that as the house of reality. We have to house ourselves inside our reality. So we have to get the knowledge of truth in a particular area. We have to get the understanding in the area. We have to develop discernment. And so I want to stop right there. The discernment piece is very important. Is if whatever spiritual path, wherever angle that you're going in terms of your spiritual practice or identity that's helping you become aware, there has to be a basis to help you discern the happenings that's going on in life. If you don't have that, you and I are being shortchanged in our spiritual reality, because spirituality is always going to be targeted about how we see what is happening. What is happening. Right? Because if you don't see what is happening, then it's easy to become the very thing that you really don't identify with, but you're not able to resist or renounce from it. So this is what I'm going to get at. So there's a point in our spiritual journeys is that when it talks about be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, there's a continual process of reconditioning ourselves. This is why a lot of people, after a while, get in the spiritual path, it becomes very challenging to them, because they start to face the reconditioning factor. They start to realize, when you start to get understanding of who you are, and you start developing a diet to understand who you are, you start to realize now you have to go through the process of unlearning in order to learn, in order to live in the world, not to be of it. To be of it means to take on the nature of it or be affected by the counter altered realities that it has us making decisions in and creating around. Unfortunately, people when they're younger, they might not really see it. They might see flashes of it. Now, some people, of course, they see it, and a lot of times you become indifferent to the consensus, because why? The world or the matrix builds itself upon the consistency of the orientation that it presents, until it's now repeated and being recirculated among those that are in consensus, or in groupthink. So one of the vehicles that the matrix uses or encourages or creates is the groupthinks, the status quos, right? Tradition, right? Custom, because those things sustains it. Because and so you don't realize the effect of it until you start to recognize the effects that it creates in the human relations. And so what happens is, why we're not able to see the matrix right at first is because a lot of times we confuse our familiarity as truth. So the truth gets almost erased by our familiarity, because a lot of us are trying to look for something to be familiar. Because a lot of times the truth might not be familiar to what's happening. Right? And so that causes a problem. A lot of times we don't recognize the matrix because we get confused with popularity. In other words, consensus. Well, it's got to be popular, so this really got to be true. Not necessarily. So this is why I say it's a challenge, because it's going to shift you. When you start talking about matrix entrapment, I'm basically letting you realize is, once you start to realize that there's counter realities that don't match you, you now got to go to this process of unlearning to learn. In other words, you got to deconform, or you got to recondition yourself. Recondition yourself onto what? unto the truth in the different areas that you see that are entrapping you. First entrapment is your own self-love, your own self-worth. Are you truly able to live and be what you see yourself as in this life? Do you feel guilty for being inside your truth? You have to answer these things. You know, do you, what you viewed as being valuable to give you identity, do you, if you no longer see it as valuable to give you identity, then you should realize you're in the process of change. You got to get to a point in life where you realize to see what really matters. And typically, when you hit this, especially a mature phase in life, you start to go through this pattern exhaustion. And the pattern exhaustion emerges when people begin to realize they might have been victimized by some type of entrapment. And so now they're trying to get out of that perceptive prison and begin to re-engineer and reorchestrate their life to mirror the love they have about themselves, the love they see to be manifest in life, to be able to pursue the things that really matches them, and not to be constantly working and serving something and not getting the value back in return. That's like I used the example earlier, talking about, you know, a lot of people who spent 30 years in the workforce, and the reality, the realistic outcome is very few is going to be able to enjoy a level of self-reliance on their savings or their, you know, their retirement to support them after, or even be strong enough to supplement their income, because the Social Security is not going to be there. But when we start talking about these areas right here, people begin to shy away. But I'm using these things just to kind of encourage us to realize the matrix entrapment is present. It's not something all spooky, you know. It's going on every day. There's decisions being made. Anytime something is, any decision or anything that's prescribing us to operate outside of loving ourselves is an effect of the matrix. Anything that's causing us to be not to see the reality of a thing is an influence of the matrix. And so now we got to be at the point, now we're in this major technological advancement, AI, all this different stuff going on, right? We hear how it's affecting certain people. People are trying to find something solid to get grounded on so they can make the right choices, and for themselves, for their loved ones and things like that. And it seems like with all this information available, why does it seem like it's hard to get the truth? Right? There's a lot of things, there's a lot of awarenesses out here, but a lot of things not point us to the truth. And so we start to make and build our lives, make our decisions around these things, and we keep tripping and realizing like this is not matching this. It's entrapment. Okay? So that's why I want to bring that out. What the matrix entrapment is, and we feel it, we begin to see the outcomes of it, but sometimes we don't see it at the very beginning. And so if you're seeing these things, you know, it's like, well, how do I switch up everything? You got to start reconditioning yourself. Get in tune with yourself. Begin to love yourself. Begin to understand what that is. You know, begin to simplify certain areas in your life that doesn't need to be complicated. What matters is the well-being of your soul. What matters is how you be able to sustain yourself, right? What matters, because we're not just here to be puppeteers to help people that's getting rich to get rich off us, and we're not able to enjoy each other. We have been really reduced down to thinking that life is meaningful by the work we do for others, and not how we treat each other, what we create, and the experience that we have. And so don't want to shift and start something more morbid, but at some point in time, when you don't look at the reality of life, you're going to find yourself becoming victim to the entrapments that's got you there. And then later on, it's going to hit you. And you're going to realize how much you gave over to the matrix for the sake of your own wellness, of your own well-being. So just want to share that drop right there. We'll touch back down. If you want more insights on a wide range of things, join me into the Soul House. Okay, inside the description, you'll see it there. Or you can go to the link on my YouTube channel page and scroll down to Soul House. Check it out. If you're trying to figure out, you want a basis on what can help me start to discern the matrix affecting me, get my book, uh, Soul Rights, because it'll give you basic 11 soul rights to let you realize is what's deterring me from my soul rights or what's encouraging me in my soul rights. Anything that's deterring you from your soul rights is an influence of the matrix. And so now you can see it, and now you can try to re-engineer yourself from that, right? You don't want to go through life being split in 10 different ways. You want to be back at center, moving forward. You want to be able to flow and begin to really maximize and actualize all that you really are in this life. That is part of your soul right. Okay? So that's what's up. Let me see what y'all have right here before I pop off. And so one love. And the person that said they're in prison, peace unto you. So hopefully that this live has shared some encouragement, some insights for you, and also a path to your own enlightenment. All right, so that's what's up. We'll touch back down. I'm live.